So listen, you know how we see in movies, and we've even covered on the podcast, where a killer gets a deep freezer?
Yes, the white ones.
Right? Those white ones. Well, not a killer, but I have a deep freezer, a white one.
Oh, God.
And we put a lot of, like frozen pizzas in it and things like that. So I went out there and noticed that things were not as frozen as they should be. I mentioned it to Blake, and he comes in and he's like, yeah, the deep freezer, it's shot. Well, I had that deep freezer because I breastfed Holland and would pump and saved a bunch of breast milk. And so that's the whole reason we got it. Well, she ended up having a ton of intolerances, and I didn't make it past 3 months. So the breast milk has just been sitting there. And it's not like, I don't know, anyone was going to use it. I kept telling myself, like, just keep it on hand. Like, if she gets sick, there's antibodies in it. And we never ended up using it. She had a lot of reflux issues. So anyways, it's in there. And I was like, man, that sucks. All that breast milk is just, you put so much work into it and it's gone. Well, then a couple days later, it seems like Blake handled it, moved everything out of the freezer, whatever. A couple days later, the smell shows up. He comes inside. And he's about to throw up. And then a couple seconds later, it hits my face. He's like, I found the smell. There's all that breast milk in the deep freezer. And I'm like, what? You didn't take it out? And he's like, no, I thought it would be fine, but it all exploded.
No.
As it got warm, the pressure from being in a frozen packet, it expanded, it busted, and then it just was rotting. So... It was the worst smell. And then, to make it worse, we were listing our house in like 3 days. And we didn't know how to, you can't just put a freezer out in the trash, Like, you have to dispose of it in a different way because of what it's made out of.
Right.
So I'm like, what are we going to do with this deep freezer? And all I thought about was our podcast and all the times I've seen people put bodies in deep freezers. And I'm like, how the fuck does this happen to me? And it doesn't happen to a murderer? Like,
what did you do with the deep freezer?
He ended up pouring a bunch of bleach in it.
Sounds like a crime scene.
Sounds like a total crime scene. He put the deep freezer in our other second garage that's not insulated. So it doesn't hold smells as much as like our drywalled garage does, and then he disposed of it properly later.
Wow.
I don't know. Those deep freezers are not reliable. If you're planning on putting someone in it, I don't.
3, 2.
Hi, Dee.
Hi, Dee. Oh man, episode 9. Here we are. Let's do this.
Here we are.
Sorry for the delay, everyone. Honestly, life just doesn't get easier. It gets harder.
Yeah, every week by week, day by day.
Day by day.
Pile on more stuff to handle.
Episode by episode, it just keeps getting... And we just need to let you guys know, we have these amazing ideas and these, like, that we're trying to come to fruition, but as these ideas are coming into our laps, we are experiencing life at full speed. So...
Yep.
Full thank speed you ahead. For patience with us, and trust me, it's only going to get better. So we are excited to get all that stuff out there. Yeah,
this episode is a big one, which I didn't want to mess it up or not do it justice or let any detail go missed. It's a really, really big one, and we'll discuss it as we get into it, of course. Now, what is our drink today from your grandpa's little black book?
Today's drink I actually really like. It's called the Oh Johnny Cocktail. It's 1/4 ounce of maple syrup, 1/4 ounce of lime juice, 3/4 ounce of grapefruit juice, which I'm not actually a fan of, and 1 1/4 ounce of apple brandy, which is not the easiest to find in liquor stores, but I did find it, and it's fantastic. Okay.
Are you ready to get into it?
Let's do it. Hi, everyone! Welcome to the Forensic Files Duo podcast, where we recap, review, and provide updates on the cases featured on the true crime TV show Forensic Files. I'm Drew, and I knew nothing about true crime until we started this podcast.
And I'm Danielle, and true crime raised me.
If you're listening to us for the very first time and want to hear more about our friendship and how we became the Forensics Duo many moons ago, head over to episode 1 for the whole backstory.
Now, for our regular disclaimer, we understand that we will be discussing a lot of sensitive topics, so although we may laugh at times, please remember that we are laughing at ourselves and ourselves only. We are not making light of what the victims and their families have gone through and may continue to be going through.
And in an effort to use the public's overall interest in the show Forensic Files and leverage the power of digital media, once the episode coverage is over, we will highlight 2 missing person cases, a case that's currently on the BIA's Missing and Murdered Indigenous People database, and another on the Black and Missing Foundation's website.
Today's episode is episode 19 from season 14 called Skeleton Key. And I know you, Drew, really liked the title, thinking of the movie Skeleton Key, but this episode has nothing to do with an actual skeleton key at all. Nothing. So this episode is actually about a huge case that paved the way for a lot of change. I'm kind of annoyed they picked such an unrelated title when that has so much relevance in pop culture.
I was so excited because I was thinking, it's going to kind of maybe
be related.
Yeah, and all of these titles are a little bit misleading because they end up being just so sad. And it's completely opposite.
Welcome to true crime.
I know, the complete opposite feeling of what I was going in thinking. I was ready to do this, and I watched it, I was like, oh my God. Okay.
I feel like episode after episode, you're still thinking you're going to
get my scary movie fix.
Yeah, to get some sort of scary movie review podcast, and that is not what we're doing here.
We're not doing that.
It hasn't set in.
No. This episode covers the murder of Tamika Huston, but we will go deeper into how her disappearance, the lack of national media interest compared to other cases in the national spotlight, and how it inspired an important shift in the conversation and coverage, one that we even mention on every single episode of this podcast.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I want to say this is the case that inspired the creation of the Black and Missing Foundation. There's now a lot of resources out there to learn more about the case, but the most in-depth deep dive into Tamika's story is the Audible original podcast called Finding Tamika. It is also touched on in episode 2 of the HBO documentary series called Black and Missing.
The case takes place in Spartanburg, South Carolina in the spring of 2004. Do we have any info on the city?
It seems like a normal southern town, a mixture of, socioeconomic communities, a cute little downtown area, and then just everything outside is really spread out like a ton of other towns across the country. But on Reddit, Connect Focus 8035 said, one of Spartanburg's nicknames is Sparkle City. It is derived from a 1950s rock group from the area who achieved national fame called the Sparkletones. Elvis Presley once performed in Spartanburg, and it is said that he got the idea of wearing sparkly clothes from the Sparkletones. I thought that was so cool.
Oh my gosh, I love the name Sparkletones.
Yeah, I knew you would.
I feel like that's the name of an a cappella group I should start.
That would be so good.
The Sparkletones.
Okay, should we get into the episode?
Yes.
Up next, a nursing student disappears.
It's really a mystery as to where she's vanished.
The only real clue is a set of keys.
Peter thinks he's real clever, saying,
The trick for investigators is finding out which door they might open.
This episode opens with Aunt Rebecca introducing us to Tamika Huston, and just a little insight into who Aunt Rebecca is. First and foremost, she's a badass.
Agreed.
And she is the reason we know about this case. Rebecca was working in PR when all this began. She had graduated from Howard University School of Law, and she is also married to Desmond Howard, the ESPN college football analyst. He's also a Heisman Trophy winner from his time playing at U of M, University of Michigan. He also is an MVP Super Bowl champion who also played for the Detroit Lions. So there's a lot of Michigan tie-ins. Yeah, I knew your dad would like that, even though I don't know if he'd listen, but...
My dad listens every now and then when I start talking about police terms, he's like...
That's for you, Mike Reese. Anyways, so we will hear a lot from Rebecca, and I wanted to make sure I properly introduce her at the top, because she tells us that when Tamika was little, she was just like you and I, Drew. She wanted to be a professional singer, but unlike me, she actually had the talent for it. Okay, I am still haunted by the time you almost made me sing Summer Lovin' from Greece for that local tuxedo shop's fashion show for prom. Do you remember this?
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Okay, I often think about what would have happened had we gone through with that, and how it could have probably ruined me ever setting foot on a stage ever again. I am so grateful. I think about it all the time.
You would not. No.
It would have been so bad. I remember us rehearsing, and I was so sick to my stomach. I was like, I don't sing. This is not my thing. I never was.
Well, neither did I at the time. I don't really know if I can now.
But you had vocal training. You were in, what was it? Choir? No, what was it called?
Yeah, I was in choir, and then I did the a cappella group called Ladies and Falcons, and I'm going to start my own called the Sparkletones.
There we go, coming soon. Yeah, not me in it. I will not be in it. Not singing Summer Lovin'. Not me.
But wait, I need to go back to this part in the episode because it literally took me back to like a slap in the face of reality, because she says like, I don't know if it was Rebecca or it was Peter saying making it in the entertainment industry is very tough. I think that was her aunt. And then she went into nursing.
Yes. So that is exactly what she did after trying out for American Idol.
I know. And so like took me back straight to COVID when I thought my whole world was crumbling beneath me, as did everyone else. But like in the entertainment industry, it was like, it's never coming back. And then I remember talking to my mom and I was like brainstorming ideas of what I can do as like an alternative. And I was like, you know what, Mom, I'm going to go into nursing. And she's like, she literally put down her phone and she looked at me and she's like, you will not be going into nursing because I would never trust you with my life in a hospital position because your ADHD would get so distracted you probably wouldn't diagnose me right or give me the right medication. And I was like, valid. It's a valid point. And she's like, why would you want to go into nursing? I was like, because they need me, Mom. Everyone.
They need me and I just want to be needed.
Reese Witherspoon just came on the news and said, we need more nurses. So I think I should go. And she's like, absolutely not. No, come up with another idea. Oh gosh, that line in the beginning of the episode really struck a nerve. And
honestly, it struck me too, because unlike us, she woke up from that show business spell, and we have not been able to.
She did try out for American Idol and sat outside, I think, for a whole day. And she was devastated when she didn't even make the first cut. But Aunt Rebecca says that she was very spontaneous and was the type of person to just get in her car and kind of go. So when classes were out for the summer and she had more free time, everyone in her circle thought she had done something like that to just get away and relax.
Now, this is all taking place in 2004, so cell phones, they're just emerging and becoming more normal, but still not to the point we're at now where everybody has one. And that's why when they couldn't get in touch with her, no one really immediately panicked.
But after 2 weeks, her family knew something was wrong, and Aunt Rebecca calls the police. And we meet investigator Sergeant Jay Stedman, and he gives us the old...
Tamika was 24 years old, and it's perfectly acceptable for someone who doesn't want to call someone to not call them.
It might be acceptable, but that doesn't make loved ones any less concerned. I was worried we were about to hear about how they wasted a ton of time telling them they can't make a missing persons report. But to my relief, it sounds like police did their civic duty and they took action immediately.
They went to Tamika's house and noticed her car was gone and the doors were locked, but they were not just about to leave without any answers. So they gained access through an open window.
Okay, man, this part hurts.
Yeah, this one
Police found Tamika's dog and a litter of puppies in the back room on the verge of starvation. Okay, Forensic Files shows a video of a healthy corgi-looking type dog. That isn't even the same breed of Tamika's actual dog, Macy. She was a pitty, but they also show a litter of very healthy puppies. And these puppies are like nursing on that dog in the footage. But what police actually found wasn't her dog on the verge of starvation. Her dog was starving. And to survive, she ended up actually eating all but one of her puppies, I found out.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Yeah. And it's not uncommon for dogs to do that in these circumstances, but it's just so devastating in something that's already a very traumatic circumstance.
Prosecutor Trey Gowdy is now here to tell us that they were all made very aware of just how much she loved animals and would never leave her dog alone like that, especially with her expecting puppies.
But with no obvious signs of something happening to her at her home and no clues to where she'd gone, police issued a be on the lookout, which is also called a BOLO, for Tamika's car. It was a 1991 black Honda. Her family and friends then band together and they put up missing person flyers all over town while police check her cell phone and credit card records, but there had been no activity during the time she'd been missing.
Then we meet Tamika's ex-boyfriend, Terrance Moss. Tamika and Terrance had been together for about 4 years, living together up until the point they broke up, which was just 3 months earlier. And we learned that Tamika had not only accused him of domestic abuse, she filed assault charges against him and then disappeared just 2 weeks before she was to appear in a court.
Now, just some backstory context here. I am going to talk a lot about the podcast called Finding Tamika, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, and it really dives deep into Tamika's story, into her family, into her background. Another thing that we are going to talk about a lot here is domestic violence. And something that I don't think I've included in the past is domestic abuse hotlines. So I want to include that here because, you know, when Tamika goes missing, it's right around the time that she leaves Terrance, and she's also pressing charges against him and supposed to appear in court. Statistics show that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they are leaving a violent partner. So, you know, just with the timing and everything, it doesn't look good for Terrance at all. But I think right now is a good time to mention the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Their website is thehotline.org and their number is 800-799-7233. But you can also text or chat with someone right now on their website. You know, if you're in the situation or you know someone, you need to make a plan. You need to have a support system, and you need to just unfortunately make a record of the abuse and protect yourself. That website is full of resources to help you or someone that you know identify abuse and plan for safety. So all that info will also be available in the show notes. Now back to Tamika.
Terrance claims he knows nothing about Tamika's disappearance, but openly admits to the assault charges.
He admitted the assault, claiming it was a one-time incident.
I punched her. I actually punched her. And I fell down on my knees and I started praying. And I was like, it's just so many demons in here that, you know, we're becoming physical with each other now that we just need to separate.
Well, naturally, the cops start thinking this might be their main suspect, so they're coming down harder on him, repeating questions, pushing to maybe get the answers they want to get, and ultimately Terrance stops talking. As Danielle has told us time and time again, and always do, shut your mouth and get a lawyer.
That's right, because of course Terrance is now
Terrance Moss is prime suspect number one.
But 1 month goes by with no answers, no leads, and no idea where Tamika is.
We're told her loved ones still have an undercurrent of a sense of hope. And when I heard that, I felt that hope, but then remembered what we're watching, and I know these episodes never have a happy ending. But finally, a tip comes in. A tenant in a nearby apartment complex called. She's seen the flyers and the description of the car, so when she noticed a car that had not moved in a while, she called it in. Turns out the car was just 4 miles away from Tamika's home.
So this brings us to our true crime class for this episode, Drew.
Okay.
The way Tamika's case plays out is exactly why media coverage is crucial when trying to find answers, find suspects, or find a missing human being. So Tamika's face became very familiar to people in Spartanburg, South Carolina, because of those flyers and local media attention. But who put those flyers up? Her family and friends. And who got the local media to pay attention? Aunt Rebecca. She is a badass in PR, like I said, and she's the one who got the local media to pay attention and take Tamika's case seriously and just kind of spread it out there and get the community to participate in looking for her. But that also makes Tamika an exception, not necessarily the rule when it comes for missing Black people in the media, because most people don't have an Aunt Rebecca that are as connected or have, you know, those kind of skills and those kind of connections to push for the family and know how to cope with it and know exactly how to deliver it to make it something that a news outlet would want to cover. So she used every contact and resource she had at her disposal, and she still couldn't get national media coverage. Yet during this time, Natalie Holloway goes missing, a woman named Lori Hacking goes missing, and Lacey Peterson goes missing. And most Americans would recognize those names due to the amount of national coverage their cases got and still continue to get. Lori Hacking, she has a whole law made in her name. I believe it's in Utah. And Natalie and Lacey's cases are still in the news today. I still see news coverage about, you know, updates on their case and all those things. Rebecca is quoted saying, "Surely there's room for Tamika in this conversation. And surely I have the skills, the contacts, the ability to craft a story, because sometimes you really have to have a narrative for them to make it interesting." But nevertheless, Rebecca says she still hit a brick wall. Now, newscaster and political commentator Gwen Ifill coined the phrase missing white woman syndrome. Another major source for this episode is the Black and Missing documentary series on Max. And another journalist and White House correspondent, Deborah Mathis, she describes this syndrome as the tendency to engage in national panic when a white woman, especially lovely to look at, goes missing. The country has a conniption. She goes on to say, they cover the crying family, they cover the neighbors and friends putting up missing posters, they cover every development, every person of interest and suspects. Another person on the docuseries is Vincent Warren. He is a leading expert on racial injustice and discriminatory policing and the executive director of the Center of Constitutional Rights. He tells us that when we see terrible things happen in Black communities in the media, many people think that Black victims are somehow accomplices in the bad things that have happened to them. But the opposite is true. When terrible things happen in white communities, how many times have we heard, this kind of thing never even happens here? Although the national conversation and coverage about the disparity in this specific coverage has increased, that is because of Rebecca and how she took Tamika's case to expose that and bring the conversation to a national level. However, when doing so, the story became about that overall disparity in coverage, and the details of Tamika's case have been lost in the mix. So this is something I can personally attest to. I have been paying attention to these conversations that are happening, and that is why we even do the missing person cases at the end of every episode. But even after spending so much time on the Black and Missing Foundation website, on their social media, and years of just listening to true crime news, podcasts, documentaries, I am admittedly embarrassed to say that I didn't know the details of her case either. So I hope, if anything, a few more people now know about her story and the impact it has had on the efforts to inspire change.
Wow. Like, you just watched the episode and you don't really know the huge backstory or like what this catapulted and became from just this episode. You just you're watching it as if if you were to, whenever this episode aired, I'm sure it wasn't described as with everything that happened afterwards.
No, they left out so much, and I will touch on everything the best that I can. But I do think that is, I say it later on too. Half of me is happy that they covered it because they covered it. The other half of me, though, is really disappointed.
Well, this case is the perfect example for why it is crucial to make a community aware of missing person cases, because a woman who saw a flyer saw something and said something, and she led the police right to Tamika's car. But then Peter says,
Police found no forensic evidence, no blood, and no sign of a struggle.
But then in the same breath he says they find a partial fingerprint and a set of keys on the passenger side floor that don't go to Tamika's car or home. Sir, according to what you've taught me, that sounds like evidence.
Get him, Drew.
Sparkle tones, initiate.
And due to everyone's surprise, that partial fingerprint doesn't match Tamika's ex-boyfriend, Terrance, or anyone in the National Fingerprint Database.
You could see that one looked like an automobile key and one looked like a house key.
None of the keys worked in Tamika's car or her home.
The keys don't belong to Tamika Huston, so maybe they belong to the person responsible for her disappearance.
Investigators noticed a code on one of the keys. It had a stamp on it that said AA14. They took the key to all of the locksmiths in the area, and bingo, they found the matching code to the customer who made it. Fremont School Apartments.
An old elementary school converted into apartments. Ugh, I love when they can repurpose a place like this for affordable housing. I think it's great. And you are shaking your head no. You think it's haunted.
I do think that it's great for for what they created that into. But I don't know if I would step foot into an apartment of an old school. I kind of would be intrigued, but I also would be I would have my ghost meter on. I would just be trolling the halls in the middle of the night looking for ghosts, but also very scared. In New York, those apartments would be $2.5 million.
Oh, for sure. And it's funny that you say that, because as I listen to the rest of the Finding Tamika podcast, they actually tell us that they are luxury apartments now.
No.
Yep.
Detectives tried the key in each of the 46 apartment doors with no luck. But then they're told there's one more door to try in the basement, but that apartment hasn't been in use because of flooding. Well, guess what? It worked. But Peter just keeps the contradictions coming in hot.
Strangely, it didn't open any of them, but it did open a storage area door.
It fit a door in the basement. And the door that it fit in the basement, when it opened up, that was an apartment that was closed. It had been taken offline because of flood issues.
Did it or did it not open one of the doors? Is it a storage area or is it an apartment?
Investigators seized a tremendous amount of what they were hoping would be evidence out of that offline apartment. They processed it for any kind of DNA or any signs of Tamika, but it ended up being a dead end. Then the apartment manager, who, by the way, went door to door with them trying the key, finally decides to let the investigators know about their eviction policy.
Y'all, this complex just swaps doorknobs when they had to evict someone.
When a tenant is evicted, maintenance often removes the entire doorknob from the evicted tenant's apartment door and replaces it with a doorknob from another apartment.
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Like, is that normal? I don't
No, that is not normal. That's why I have a whole bit for you to play the landlord.
Oh, hey, Barb. Looks like Bill doesn't pay rent. Can you close your eyes while I swap his with someone else's? No peeking, Barb. Okie dokie, all set. If you see Lorraine, can you tell her to come to the leasing office now to get a new key? Bye-bye now.
Unfortunately, they didn't keep good records of which doorknobs were swapped.
I'm not shocked in this latest, but also you can't be serious.
Investigators asked for a list of tenants, including those who'd been evicted, and they showed that list to Tamika's friends and relatives.
Her best friend Zelda was the only person who had heard of a new guy named Chris that Tamika was casually seeing, and she had actually met him very briefly a few days before Tamika disappeared.
And wouldn't you know, there was only one person named Chris on the list. Christopher Hampton.
Okay, here I am with more additional backstory. This is also from the podcast. Chris is actually the reason her and Terrance broke up. Tamika was introduced to Chris while he was still in prison from someone that they mutually knew that was also locked up. And when he got out, he, I guess, called her constantly and even called the home she shared with Terrance. So that caused a lot of problems and they eventually broke up.
Well, when they look into him further, they learn that Chris had been evicted from the Fremont apartments 1 month after Tamika disappeared. When investigators tried to locate him, he was in prison for a parole violation.
Full stop. This is not correct. Sorry, not sorry to have to call you out, Forensic Files, but this is kind of why we're here, right, Drew?
What?
Yeah, so Chris came in to talk to police, and he gave them a story about giving Tamika $150 to go to Myrtle Beach. He was not in prison at the time. He came in again and agreed to do a polygraph, but he failed it.
Wow.
Then police were able to rearrest him for a parole violation. So I had to really piece things together, and that's why I was like, sorry, we need to reschedule.
Right.
Sorry, we
right.
need to reschedule. There was just so much here that I had to piece together, and I am going to take, finding Tamika and that whole podcast, that is the holy grail of information. The way their investigation, their sources, everything, that is where you should go when you want the facts. Forensic Files ain't it. So now about 10 months after Tamika's disappearance, America's Most Wanted airs an episode dedicated to Tamika's case, all thanks to Rebecca's endless efforts. This is the first national coverage, and Forensic Files doesn't even mention this. I don't understand. That's a huge thing of Tamika's case hit America's Most Wanted. That's a huge detail.
Yeah, but do you think it's because it was a competing show?
I didn't even think about that. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
They wouldn't air another thing on it because they're going to have their own episode on it.
Oh my God. I didn't even think about that, and you're probably absolutely right. And that's so shitty.
Oh my God, I'm right. Well, I don't know if I'm right, but
I mean, that sounds
yeah, because that was a big TV show back then.
I mean, huge.
Yeah.
And yes, they probably were competing with ratings, and who knows what time America's Most Wanted aired at that time
Right.
versus Forensic Files. Wow.
I'm getting it. I'm starting it, you guys. I'm starting to get the true crime bone in my body.
So not only do they not mention it, they literally change details and omit a crime against a child that is directly linked to the case. Why? I don't know. I think you're onto something with the whole competing for ratings, maybe. Or I was thinking possibly due to limited airtime since these episodes are so short. But none of those are good enough reasons. If your program doesn't have the proper, airtime to give a story justice, you can't just change it for your benefit. And I mean, I'm glad, like I said, that they covered the case, but it's just damaging to Forensic Files credibility when you do something like that.
I'm really interested to see what the America's Most Wanted episode says. Because, yeah, I'm wondering if they, like, included stuff, like, if it aired after Forensic Files and they actually included details.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Okay, well, Drew, why don't you explain what we see in the Forensic Files episode, and I will provide the corrections from the Finding Tamika podcast.
Okay, in the episode, we are told that police get a huge break when Chris's ex-girlfriend and mother of his 2 young children saw the news and called the police. He had sent her his wallet for safekeeping before going back to prison, and there was a speck of blood on it. Then we are told that they get another tip from and I'm quoting Peter, a young woman who called to say that she was inside apartment 215 with Chris Hampton around the time of Tamika's disappearance. That young lady says there was a large brownish red stain on the floor in the bedroom, and the dresser was pulled over in front of the closet door to block anyone from going in.
Okay. First, the news they're referring to was that America's Most Wanted episode. And I mention that because it proves the whole point behind why national media coverage is so important and needs to be a resource for any missing person case. Second, this tip about the dresser and the bloodstain was not a woman calling in. She was a 15-year-old girl. And turns out the reason she was in that apartment was for sex. But a child cannot consent to sex with an adult because their brain is not in a place of maturity to properly give that consent. And then there's also the imbalance of power, which makes it statutory rape. So shame on you, Forensic Files. Peter refers to her as a woman multiple times, more than twice. I had twice in my notes, and I just continued to hear it. The only one who refers to her as a girl, which she is, or was at the time, is the prosecutor. So we don't know if they cut the information out of his interview, but it's just such a huge missing detail.
And you know what? The actor that played her in the reenactment scenes, I even was like looking at that. I was like, she looks young.
Yeah, that's even
young.
That's like, it makes it so intentional.
Right.
You know, that they were like, oh, well, she was 15, but we're still going to call her a woman.
Right.
And lady. And this woman called. Yeah, like.
But yet we're going to hire someone that looks like a young girl.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, as they start comparing the evidence to Chris in the apartment, we find out Chris's prints also do not match the partial print found in Tamika's car, so we never find out who that belonged to. But they did test the blood on the wallet with DNA from her mother and father, and the DNA test left no doubt.
The blood was Tamika's.
During the same time that the tips are coming in and Chris is back in prison, Lieutenant Lamb is writing to Chris, and he's building a relationship with him. And this is where Chris starts making up wild stories. Now, again, this is from the podcast, so I'm just trying to fill in these details so we get the full picture. This is not in the episode. In a letter, he claims that someone had broken into his apartment, taken a few things, and get this, squirted ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise everywhere. So the last day he saw her, that's why he had also rented a steam cleaner.
Ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise. That's what you go with? Someone was trying to make a really fierce sandwich and it just got messy.
Picture this. Someone's seriously telling you this and you're just imagining a burglar breaking in with condiments and squirting them everywhere? That letter and the blood on the wallet, it gave investigators more than enough probable cause to issue a search warrant on the apartment. They didn't know if the current residents were connected to Chris at all, but they still took care of them. They weren't connected, by the way. But they had to remove them from the apartment, and they took care of them and they put them in a separate apartment. And when I heard that detail, it's like, that was my extra ADHD mind going. And I was like, but what about the people that live there? And I was like, okay, thank you for that information.
Hopefully with brand new locks.
Right? Not ones from Lorraine's apartment, because we know where those ones came from. Also not in the episode, but important details from the podcast. Chris rented the furniture that the young girl that spoke about in her tip about how that furniture was moved in front of the closet door. So all of that, since it was rented, it was now in other homes. So they had to track down every piece of his furniture, and they did it, which is extremely thorough.
If you haven't assumed it by now, her ex-boyfriend Terrence was no longer considered a suspect. Now, while searching Chris's apartment, they find evidence of a cleanup in his bedroom, exactly as the young girl described.
So you start peeling away the carpet.
When they pulled the carpet up, there was a large reddish-brown stain that was on the back of the carpet and into the padding on the floor, and it tested positive for human blood.
Well, now luminol enters the chat. We all remember luminol. Analysts sprayed luminol in every room of the apartment and found even more signs of blood. The images of the apartment that are shown, it just shows that the whole apartment is lighting up. But the worst part is when they said that the stain in the closet was the size of a head.
Then we meet DNA analyst Manuel Ortuna, who tells us that with modern DNA testing, they are able to confirm that the blood belonged to a female, and they had a full profile to match her parents. And the results tells us that this is all Tamika's blood.
It just took all the life out of me because I knew that hey, my daughter was in an apartment and there was enough blood that my daughter could have died.
I found this part so interesting that DNA testing can just right off the bat tell if it's a female or male.
Yeah.
I found that so interesting. Between the blood evidence and information provided by the young girl, investigators can put together a picture of what most likely happened. And the way this goes down is just deranged.
He sticks her in a closet and goes and gets a girl and has sex with her and enjoys a meal.
When confronted with this evidence, Chris denied any involvement and said someone else put the blood in the apartment. And he failed another 6-hour polygraph.
Oh my gosh, 6 hours?
There shouldn't be no 6-hour polygraph. Okay, I'm not on Chris's side here, but come on.
6 hours?
Yeah. So he starts to realize just how much is stacked against him, and he makes the police an offer. He stands up and says, I'll show you where she's at.
He led investigators to a wooded area 12 miles away and pointed to the exact spot where he had made a cross out of sticks to mark the spot where he buried her body. In a shallow grave, police found remains and dental records confirm that it is Tamika.
Another detail left out is that these were only partial remains. We meet a reporter in this episode named Alexander Morrison, but we're not told that he actually spoke to Chris in an interview, and Chris gave him details that were just horrendous. Instead of doing our recap, I'm going to tell you what Chris said happened, because honestly, Forensic Files didn't get it completely right. Chris says in the interview with Alex Morrison that the two had been in an intense argument over money that he apparently was giving to another woman who was expecting his child. That's when he picked up the iron and threw it, striking Tamika on the head and killing her. He freaked out, left for a while, came back, and she was still there. It's believed that he moved her to the closet, and that's when the young girl came over, and that's when she witnessed the state of the apartment. I can't even imagine the trauma she has to recover from after knowing, that Tamika was most likely in the closet. But after that, he said he borrowed a friend's car, put Tamika's body inside, and drove all night. In the early morning, he buried Tamika in a wooded area, and he marked the grave then with the cross that you mentioned. He said he made the cross from 2 tree branches and left. And then he says the publicity made him feel guiltier. Good. Fucking good. He's quoted saying, I was going to report it. I was going to turn myself in. But when he was released in July 2004, he was torn about his guilt and his desire to remain a free man because his daughter was born prematurely while he was in jail. And he says, I held her. And it just feels so good. So it sounds like he was released for that parole violation, but I couldn't find too much clarity on this. Just want to state that. Anyways, he drove back to the place that he had buried her, planned to put her remains back in the car and drive to the police station. Again, he says, I was going to dig her up and turn her in. But when he recovered her, he had second thoughts and reburied her. Parts of her skull and her remains were never uncovered. He has the nerve to say, I deserve to go to jail, but I deserve a second chance. He said he worried what people thought of him. I know I'm a good person. A lot of people who know me know I'm a good person. Well, Tamika knew you, and you weren't a good person to Tamika. And guess what? Tamika doesn't get a fucking second chance. So rot in prison. I don't care.
Now here is how the forensic evidence all falls into place.
On May 27th, 2004, Chris strikes Tamika in the head with his iron.
A tiny drop of blood landed on the inside of his wallet.
Blood also dripped onto the carpet.
Chris wrapped Tamika's body and put her in the closet.
He put his dresser in front of the closet door.
Chris brings that child to his apartment.
She saw the blood stain on the floor and the positioning of the dresser.
The next day, he used a friend's car to transport Tamika's body to the wooded area.
This is where he buried her in a shallow grave.
He rented a carpet cleaner and removed as much blood as he could.
He sure knew how to do his chores, I guess, but the cleaner didn't remove everything.
Later, when he abandoned Tamika's car in a nearby apartment complex,
he mistakenly dropped his own keys on the passenger side floor.
A set of keys with a code on top that led them to his apartment complex.
At first, he claimed it was an accident.
But he changed his mind on the first day of his trial and pled guilty.
Chris was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
There's a part where the prosecutors talk about the morals of the story and talk about evidence, and damn did this miss the real moral of the story here.
To the women in Tamika's life, and the women of Spartanburg, South Carolina, y'all are a true sisterhood. They were on it and they fucking rallied for Tamika, and I love them so much for it. It was actually the women in her community and in her life that were behind her getting the justice that she received. Now, while watching Black and Missing on Max to learn more about the case, I learned that Derica Wilson, who is one of the co-founders of the Black and Missing Foundation, is also from Spartanburg. You learn about how her and her sister-in-law, Natalie Wilson, started the foundation, and it just all comes back to Tamika's case. Tamika's spirit is truly working through all of them.
Wow. I did not know this. This is crazy.
I know. And that's why I was just like, I like the fact that you don't go out and like do the research, because I really do like seeing your reactions. I think it's just really cool because it's like you're hearing it hopefully
for the first time.
I would hope you're hearing it for the first time, and I'm hoping that our listeners are also making these, like big realizations of, we've talked about the Black and Missing Foundation,
For
and
every
now
episode.
for every episode, and this is its origin story, and this is the origin case, and this is also very eerie, and I wrote my notes about her spirit working through them before I finished the podcast Finding Tamika. And this is wild. And I included it because I know you specifically are going to find it very interesting. Lieutenant Lamb consulted a medium during the investigation. Look at your eyes. Okay, so her name is Elaine, and she didn't want a reward or be a part of the news. She actually wanted to remain anonymous. Something about Elaine resonated with Lamb, and he asked her to go for a ride. She was able to identify locations that only detectives knew had connections to Tamika's case. And then he, randomly called her back and asked, "Do you think she was shot?" And she said no. She's on the left side of the closet. If you look at the recreation of the case,
It's the left side of the closet.
closet's on the left. Yeah. And that's also something I actually forgot to mention. The America's Most Wanted episode did a recreation as well. And the reason why the young girl calls in is because their recreation of the room wasn't right.
Really?
And that's what triggered her memory. And she's like, no, that dresser was in front of the door. There was a stain on the floor, because they didn't have that information yet.
Right.
And so here we go again, national coverage. It sparks memories. It triggers people, being like, no, wait, that wasn't right. And, it's really important.
Yeah.
So the medium thing happens. And also at the same time, her best friend Zelda also talks about all these dreams she's having of finding Tamika somewhere in the woods. Her dreams were so powerful, she even called the police to tell them that she's in the woods. And police weren't so sure, because at first they even drained a whole lake looking for her.
Wow.
Yeah. At the end of Finding Tamika, narrator and actress Erica Alexander, who I know her from the role in The Cosby Show, she ends with this quote, and it just really hit me because of all the things that, I had written, and then those two stories about Elaine and Zelda. She says, "Tamika's new conduit is us, all of us, and now it falls to us to lift this story from analog and pixels to heaven knows where, to find them. It's up to us to find the lost, or the lost will find us. Let's just say we are Tamika now."
Wow.
Oh, she says it's so much more powerful, and I can't, take her audio, but listen to the podcast. It's just so good. It's so important. Everything is so important in that podcast.
And you know what's crazy is that we started this podcast because of Forensic Files and the correlation between us both.
Yeah.
And we were tossing around ideas of how we were going to pick our episodes, and it's just so interesting and ironic that the way we structure our podcast with the Black and Missing Foundation's website, and then we come across this episode, and we're just going in order, everyone. We are literally going from the very first season to the very last, and it's just so crazy how the correlation between it all.
And it just makes me feel like Tamika's spirit is definitely working through people in this genre, and just trying to elevate the conversation and help find other missing women, children, people in general.
When was the Black and Missing Foundation founded?
In the podcast, they actually talk about the year it was founded, but they make a reference of saying actually it was created 4 years prior, because it was Tamika's case that started Natalie and Derica to come up with this idea and say, we need to create something out there. we need to organize. And they were looking at numbers and just the percentages of missing Black people. It cannot be ignored, and it needs this attention. So
it makes me feel like we're doing something right, I guess.
That's kind of our hope, though. We didn't want to exploit the cases or the victims. So that is why we wanted to provide something impactful that could help, even if it's small. You never know who's listening. And this episode really it was a big one.
Well, for our missing person cases section today, we want to ask you to watch Black and Missing on Max. Every single one of those cases deserve your attention. And if you'd like to dive even deeper, listen to the Audible original Finding Tamika. Do we have any updates besides what we already talked about?
I actually do, and this one is very sad. So in January of 2017, Anthony Huston, Tamika's father, he was found dead inside his home, and his wife, Joanne Brown Huston, was rushed to a hospital where she also died. They died of gunshot wounds in what was suspected to be a murder-suicide by Anthony.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Joanne is Tamika's stepmother. Her mother did leave Anthony, and that is talked about in the Finding Tamika podcast. So I would like everyone to go there. More on their story is told by Anthony and Joanne's daughter, Tamika's half-sister, and she was the one to find her parents. She was at home at the time. So very traumatic situation. A friend of Anthony's is quoted saying in an article, "You don't know the issues the person next door to you is having." It's really, really tragic. Wow. It's just really tragic. And then just an update on Chris. He continues to fight to be released, stating his confession is a coerced confession. He wasn't allowed to participate in the podcast, but he did write into them, and they included some excerpts from his letters, but who cares? Not me. So yeah, it's just a bunch of bullshit. Yeah, that's episode 9. It's a lot.
That was a big one.
Big one.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't let me know any of the information, because I was genuinely surprised by surprise.
Yeah. And I wanted you to take it in as our listeners are taking it in as well. So yeah, it was a lot. And that's why you were like, "Can I help? Do you want more of my notes?" I was like, no, let me do this. Let me put it together. It's a lot of information.
And I just am getting more frustrated as we go on and find out that Forensic Files is not doing the job of what the reason why the show was created. This show was created to shine light on cases and kind of shine a nice light onto the science of everything. And the fact that they don't include the proper stories of certain things that we're watching, and then also they leave out so much,
right.
It makes me happy that the show is not on air and that there are shows out.
But it is still being aired. That's the problem.
I know.
And I genuinely did not expect this. When we started this, I did not expect so many things to be wrong.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, it just makes me feel like, am I sure? I have that anxiety of am I sure I'm right? I don't want to be
right.
What do they call it? Keyboard warrior or something. But I just, I listened to that full podcast, and I'm going to take her family's word, her, all the witnesses' word, the prosecutor, the reporter, it's just the way that they edit. And, it's one thing, I guess I think I could excuse it a little bit more if it was the older episodes, but this episode aired, this is the last season, which was 2011. So, and I think also what makes me feel like it's important to keep doing these episodes is because there is such a huge following of people that actually rewatch episodes and just really like the format. And it's well, these things aren't accurate.
Right.
Okay.
Episode 9, we did it.
Yeah.
Episode 9.
I need a nap, but I gotta move. I have to move on Saturday, my whole damn house.
Oh my gosh.
The choices I make.
Our next episode bounces us right back to season 1. It is episode 5 called Planted Evidence. My brain went straight to Little Shop of Horrors.
Mine too. Why? Why did that happen? Plant, in a plant. Oh.
Planted. Audrey 2. Got it.
That was the first show I ever saw you in.
I know. That was the first musical I ever did.
Yeah, I just had met you, and we had just become friends in drama.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure this is not going to be about a man-eating plant, so hopefully, fingers crossed.
We can stay positive until then. If you do like our podcast, please help us spread the word. Share on social media, share on Reddit, share everywhere, and drop a review to tell us what you think.
And if you don't, then fine.
Fine.
Turn it off. Don't listen to us.
Okay, until the next one.
Bye.
Bye.